Aurora's earliest settlers came from Sheraton, Iowa in 1871, with the idea of establishing a town they hoped would eventually become the county seat. It was centrally located in the county, and it was anticipated the Burlington Northern and Aurora Railroad may someday arrive. A pair of stately cottonwoods on the bank of Lincoln Creek, north of the present business district, gave them further reassurance about their decision. Trees of any sort were an outstanding landmark on the prairie, and these majestic trees towered well above the surrounding area. David Stone, one of the founders, named the town Aurora after his wife's hometown in Illinois. Many years after those original cottonwoods were gone, Aurora, now the county seat, became home to still another towering landmark.
County seat of Hamilton County was in the southeast corner because these are where the first settlements were located when the county was first organized. It was in the very extreme southeast corner. The Blue River was down there, and of course they were following that. One of the ancient trails went through there. And so at Orville City there was a very small frame wooden building that served almost like a little like one of the first early frame houses that was built, was used as a county seat and as county courthouse down there. Before, the first county seat was in Orville City, and the county was organized in 1871. But by 1876, Aurora had become a viable community, and there was a large impetus towards moving the county seat to Aurora. And after about 5 votes, which was bitterly contested, there was sometimes 2 and 3. Hamilton was one of them, Orville City was one, and of course Aurora was one. In 1876, the courthouse actually came to Aurora. It's a picture of the second courthouse in Aurora. It's regrettable that we don't have a picture of the first courthouse in Aurora. I understand it was sort of like a little frame dwelling, and it was later moved into the residential district and used as a dwelling. This was the second courthouse. The original courthouse, of course, was the square structure that you see here. Later on, as government expanded, there was this addition placed on it, and later on there was a second story added to this, and so it was all a composite unit by the time it burned in
1894.
What was remained of the courthouse after the fire in 1894. Some of the wood was still left here on one corner. The rest of it was completely destroyed. What you're seeing here are some brick vaults in here that held the valuables of the treasurer's office and some of the other offices, and you had bystanders around looking at what was left of their courthouse. Interesting about these vaults, the treasurer claimed that when he left the night before, the door was locked, but somehow it was ajar. Now, suspicious circumstances were that this was soon after the changeover from county administration. I think the officers left office on January 4th, and a new slate of officers had taken place. And immediately there began to be public accusations of the former county treasurer, Peter Farney, that somehow he had caused the fire in order to cover up some alleged shortages in his books. It kept boiling until finally there was a grand jury indictment who seemed to have found evidence enough for an indictment. And yet, when the trial came to court, the indictment was squashed for lack of evidence. This is always puzzling, because if the grand jury had found evidence enough for an indictment, would that evidence not have been viable enough for a court trial later on? But it was not. It was dismissed. You must remember that in those days, things were very political here. A sample of it is in the 3 newspapers that were printed, and politics occupied the attention of the editors who were of different persuasions, and this was true. It was very important to have a certain party in the courthouse for both parties. I don't, at this day and age, I don't quite see the importance of it, but it was very important to those people. 1926, the postmaster, who was a good friend of his and present, was postmaster here at the time of the courthouse burning, had gone to his funeral, and he had sort of summarized the whole episode about the burning and the accusation and so forth, and he believed very strongly, of course, that Mr. Farney had sort of been the victim of the I imagine we better put it in quotes, of framing to accuse him, because nothing was found, and they later found that even the accusations first started out with thousands of dollars short on his account. Later on it was reduced to a few hundred, and even that few hundred was found later on, so there was absolutely no shortage. The courthouse burned down, of course. There were some of the papers that were saved, but a lot of the vouchers and the tax lists and so forth had to be reconstructed. this was quite a problem, and of course space became a problem, so the county officers rented space in different stores. Some of the banks had safes, and some of the county papers were placed in there, so the seat of government was pretty well scattered around the square at the time. You must remember that in 1893 and in 1894, when the bond issue was taken, that it was very poor times. The papers of that times carry many sales of farmers who were going broke, and it's just simply amazing that the bond issue passed for $56,000. About $4,000 of that was going to be reserved for furniture and things inside the courthouse. The remainder of that was for the building itself, and the building began immediately then. And this is always a source of amazement to those people who have looked at this, that people were willing that the bond issue passed with a large margin, and people from all over the county. I think there was only one or two precincts that the vote was against building. This is an actual model of the present-day courthouse that stands in the square up in the business district in Aurora. This was made by Fay Perry, one of the volunteers here at the Plainsman Museum, and he began it in 1988. He completed it in 1989. He is very meticulous in detail. He did a lot of precise measurements, and it's a very intricately detailed model of the courthouse. It can be used to talk about the actual structure. A particular feature of the courthouse, of course, as you see on pictures, is this tall tower that looms above the trees and can be seen for miles around. The tower was originally built in such fashion that these windows were added later. There are stone carvings both inside and outside of these windows as if they were meant to remain open. There was an earlier proposal when the courthouse was being built of putting a clock in the tower with faces on one on each side of it, but the commissioners were trying to get as much basic functional building with the money that had been voted without such extras, and so it remains an open space up there that could conceivably be used as a bell tower if that would have been in the intention at that time. There are stairways, of course, to get up into the actual tower. And as you go up into that tower, and as you look at the structure of it, you will see some large supporting structures in there to support the weight of that tower. As the supports continue down through the building, you'll see the supports very evident as on the second floor and on the third floor that support the weight of that tower. And of course they go clear down to the footings, and they're quite large when you get down in the basement of the courthouse. Interestingly enough, too, when we mentioned earlier about the commissioners wanting just basic building, there was a proposal to have a very gala day for a cornerstone laying, a big celebration of that, but that was deemed beyond the cost of the structure, and so there is no cornerstone per se in the exterior of the courthouse. There is a plaque inside denoting who the commissioners were at that time, who the architect was, and who the contractors were. What you're looking at now is a part of the courthouse. The interior of that part, of which, of course, is the judges' chambers that are located in this area on the third floor. The district courtroom, of course, extending over towards the center of the building. And that's just an example of the way that commissioners, ever since it was built, has preserved the original intent of the architect in the building itself. The interior walls are the same, the floors are the same. The rich woodwork of the courtroom is still present. It's very basic, but yet a very beautiful building. You will notice in some places that some of the stained glass windows have been covered for purposes of insulation and that sort of thing, but they're still there. They can be seen from the interior of the building. What you're looking at now, of course, is to the north and east of the courthouse in its present location at a bandstand. Now, in earlier pictures of the courthouse, you will not see the bandstand. The bandstand was erected in the early 1900s, but it was over an underground chamber that housed the heating plant for the courthouse. This steam plant was also connected to various business places around the square and furnished steam heat for them. The bandstand, of course, upon the organization of different kinds of bands, for instance, the cornet band, music was very popular in those days. A lot of the small towns around Aurora having their own marching band with uniforms, and Aurora, of course, was not the exception of this. There was some modification of the bandstand in later years, but then at the approach of the centennial of the courthouse, the bandstand was again remodeled to look like the original. So this was the original pattern of the bandstand as it was built over that heating plant. The house began building, as I have said, in 1894. It was completed in 1895, but in the process of that construction, the Board of Commissioners, composed of three as we are now, one of those commissioners was on duty at all the time, and I think most of the time that was the chairman of the board that felt he should be on site at all times. And at one point, I think he did effect a removal of some of the material from the courthouse as being unsatisfactory. There was some criticism of paying him for that, but I think when the courthouse was constructed, everybody felt that was a good thing, that he was on duty there. It was hard to keep spectators out of danger. At the present time, here at the museum, we have no pictures of the actual construction of the courthouse, which is regrettable, but by news accounts, there were mentions made of elevators and cranes to lift the heavy material made of brick and of stone, and There was, unlike many large projects, there was no fatality on this construction project. There was some very, very close calls with some of the people. One person working on the roof began sliding, but he caught himself at the last moment and did not fall to his death. There were some spectators who were, they weren't hurt, but they did fall. There were barriers placed around and warnings were placed, but people, being curious sidewalk superintendent, had to get very close to see what was going on. There was quite a little discussion on the selection of an architect. Mr. Gray from Lincoln was finally selected as architect, but there was some accusations by some that there was some undue influence that entered into the selection of that, but finally he was selected as architect. The Atkinson brothers of Colorado Springs were chosen as the contractors. This one wasn't the only project in the area. They were building another courthouse almost at the same time up north of us, I believe in Loop City. As far as the number of people involved, there were a lot of local people that were involved. We don't know how the particularly must have been deep footings for the courthouse were made. We're assuming it was done by horsepower. And maybe the derricks and maybe the elevator was run by horsepower as well, because there were people with dirt scoops pulled by teams of horses that prepared the site before the footings began to be dug. There were, at one time, altogether Aurora's had 7 brickyards, but at one time I believe there were 3 operating simultaneously here, and one of them was given the contract for the brickwork, and so he began firing several thousands of brick that were delivered.
The goals of Aurora's founders were embodied in the completed courthouse. Rising prominently above the surrounding community, the courthouse has been the focal point in the development of the business community as well as government. It is a reminder of the strong sense of purpose of these early settlers. Throughout its history, Aurora has prospered from its people. They have invested themselves in their own future with both their personal and financial resources. From sacrificing to build a courthouse during a depression to the building of a new library, community center, and museums, Aurora holds an enviable position of being home to a sense of vision and pride, which will take us into the next 100 years.